The silence in CNN's Atlanta headquarters was deafening. For 17 uninterrupted seconds, the most trusted name in news had become the most uncomfortable place on television. Anderson Cooper, silver-haired and stone-faced, sat frozen behind his mahogany desk while Pam Bondi's words hung in the air like smoke from a political explosion. The teleprompter had gone dark, the producers had gone mute, and somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the CNN center, executives were scrambling to comprehend what had just detonated live on their most prestigious program. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What started as a routine political grilling had morphed into something far more dangerous. Bondi had just revealed information that could reshape the entire landscape of American politics. And Cooper, for perhaps the first time in his decorated career, appeared genuinely shaken. The camera lingered on his face, capturing every micro-expression as he processed the bombshell that had just been dropped in his lap. Behind the scenes, phones were already ringing, text messages were flooding in, and social media was erupting with a force that would make this moment legendary. This wasn't supposed to happen. The interview had been meticulously planned, the questions carefully crafted, and the outcome seemingly predetermined. But Pam Bondi had other plans. She had walked into that studio with a secret that would change everything, and she was about to unleash it on the most watched cable news program in America. The aftershocks of what transpired in those crucial minutes would ripple through Washington, Wall Street, and living rooms across the nation for weeks to come. The morning of October 15th began like any other at CNN's sprawling Atlanta complex. But beneath the surface of routine efficiency, tensions were already simmering. In the gleaming executive conference room on the 32nd floor, senior producers huddled around a polished table laden with coffee cups and tablets, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of morning light filtering through floor to ceiling. Windows. The city sprawled below them, unaware that within hours, a political earthquake would originate from this very building. Dana Whitfield, CNN's head of political programming, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses as she reviewed the evenings. Line up for the third time. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table's surface, a subtle tell that even her closest colleagues had learned to recognize. Tonight's Anderson Cooper 360 was supposed to be straightforward, a hard-hitting interview with former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi about the ongoing federal investigations, swirling around several high-profile political figures. The network had been courting this interview for months, and Bondi had finally agreed to appear after weeks of careful negotiation. Marcus Rodriguez, the show's senior producer, leaned back in his chair, his salt and pepper beard meticulously groomed despite the early hour. He had worked with Cooper for over a decade, and together they had navigated some of the most explosive political moments in recent memory. But something about tonight felt different, charged with an electricity that made the veteran producer uneasy. Bondi was known for her unpredictability, her ability to turn the tables when least expected, and Marcus had spent sleepless nights crafting questions designed to pin her down without giving her room to maneuver. The preparation had been exhaustive. Research teams had compiled thick binders of background material. Fact-checkers had verified every statistic and claimed they planned to present, and legal teams had reviewed every potential line of questioning to ensure they stayed within the bounds of responsible journalism. Cooper himself had spent hours in mock interviews, practicing his delivery and anticipating Bondi's potential responses. The anchor's reputation had been built on his ability to remain unflappable under pressure, to ask the tough questions that others wouldn't dare, and to extract truth from even the most evasive political figures. In the makeup department 3 floors below, Anderson Cooper sat motionless as Christina Valdez, the network's head makeup artist, applied the final touches to his appearance. The fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows across his angular features, And Christina worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had prepared countless faces for the unforgiving glare of television cameras. Cooper's piercing blue eyes stared at his reflection in the mirror, but his mind was elsewhere, running through the questions one final time, anticipating the verbal chess match that would begin in just a few hours. The makeup room was a sanctuary of sorts, one of the few places in the building where the constant hum of breaking news and political analysis faded to a whisper. Christina had seen Cooper through some of his most challenging interviews, and she recognized the subtle signs of pre-show nerves, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest of the chair. But there was something else today, an undercurrent of anticipation that she had rarely witnessed in the usually composed anchor. Meanwhile, across the city at the Four Seasons Hotel, Pam Bondi stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her 34th floor suite, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline as the afternoon sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings. She had arrived in the city the previous evening, ostensibly for the CNN interview, but her true purpose ran far deeper than anyone at the network suspected. In her hands, she held a manila folder containing documents that could fundamentally alter the political landscape, evidence that she had been gathering for months through careful investigation and strategic alliances with sources deep within the federal bureaucracy. The folder contained more than just papers. It held the power to expose a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government, implicating figures that the American public trusted implicitly. Bondi had spent sleepless nights weighing the consequences of what she was about to do, understanding that once she revealed this information, there would be no going back. Her legal background had taught her the importance of timing, and she had chosen this moment, this platform, this audience with surgical precision. Doctor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah Chun, Bondi's longtime advisor and former federal prosecutor, sat in the suite's living area, her laptop open as she reviewed the final details of their strategy. Chun had been instrumental in helping Bondi verify the authenticity of the documents, using her network of contacts within the Justice Department and FBI to confirm details that would have been impossible for outsiders to access. The two women had worked together for nearly a year, building their case brick by brick, knowing that when they finally went public, every detail would be scrutinized with microscopic intensity. The documents told a story of systematic abuse, of power, of back-channel communications between high-ranking officials and foreign entities, of financial arrangements that violated both the spirit and letter of federal law. But more than that, they revealed a pattern of behavior that suggested the corruption went far beyond what the public had been told, encompassing individuals and institutions that had previously been considered above reproach. Back at CNN, the afternoon editorial meeting was wrapping up in the network's main newsroom, a cavernous space filled with the constant chatter of breaking news alerts and ringing phones. Assignment editors barked instructions to correspondents scattered across the globe, while producers juggled multiple storylines and breaking developments. The energy was electric, as it always was in the hours leading up to the evening programs. But today there was an added layer of anticipation surrounding Cooper's interview with Bondi. James Morrison, CNN's Washington bureau chief, participated in the meeting via video conference from the network's Capitol Hill office. His weathered face filled one of the large monitors mounted on the newsroom wall, and his gravelly voice cut through the ambient noise as he provided updates on the latest developments in the ongoing federal investigations. Morrison had covered Washington politics for 3 decades, and his instincts told him that tonight's interview had the potential to be a game-changer, though he couldn't quite articulate why. The conversation turned to potential follow-up questions and contingency plans for various scenarios that might unfold during the interview. Cooper was known for his ability to adapt on the fly, but the producers wanted to be prepared for any Eventuality. They discussed technical considerations, camera angles, lighting, the timing of commercial breaks, but beneath the operational details lay a deeper concern about controlling a narrative that seemed increasingly unpredictable. Elena Vasquez, the network's senior legal correspondent, raised concerns about the potential legal implications of some of the questions they planned to ask. As a former federal prosecutor herself, she understood the delicate balance between aggressive journalism and responsible reporting, especially when dealing with ongoing investigations. Her presence in the meeting served as both advisor and guardian, ensuring that the network's pursuit of the story didn't inadvertently compromise legal proceedings or expose CNN to liability. The discussion grew more intense as the afternoon wore on, with various department heads weighing in on their specific areas of concern. The Standards and Practices team reviewed the fact-checking protocols one final time, while the legal department provided guidance on the boundaries of what could and couldn't be discussed on air. Every angle was considered, every potential pitfall identified and addressed, yet an undercurrent of unease permeated the room. In Studio 7, the technical crew was putting the finishing touches on the set for Anderson Cooper 360. The lighting technicians adjusted the intensity and angle of each fixture, ensuring that both Cooper and his guest would be clearly visible without harsh shadows or unflattering glare. The camera operators ran through their predetermined shots, practicing smooth transitions between wide angles and close-ups that would capture every nuance of the conversation about to unfold. The set itself was designed to project authority, and gravitas-rich blues and silvers that complemented Cooper's silver hair, clean lines that suggested clarity and honesty, subtle branding that reminded viewers they were watching the most trusted name in news. Every element had been carefully chosen to create an environment that would encourage candid conversation while maintaining the professional distance that serious journalism required. Audio technician Miguel Santos tested the microphone levels for the third time, ensuring that every word would be captured with crystal clarity. He had worked on countless high-profile interviews, but something about tonight's setup made him extra cautious. The last thing anyone wanted was a technical glitch that might interrupt a crucial moment or create ambiguity about what was actually said. As the sun began to set over Atlanta, casting the CNN center in golden light, the various departments continued their preparations with the methodical precision of a military operation. In the control room, Director Patricia Kim reviewed the show's rundown one final time, noting the predetermined breakpoints and potential extension options if the interview ran long. Her 20-year career at CNN had taught her to expect the unexpected, and she had developed contingency plans for various scenarios that might require real-time adjustments to the broadcast. The graphics department had prepared a series of visual aids to accompany the interview charts, timelines, and photographs that would help viewers follow complex political relationships and chronologies. Each graphic had been fact-checked multiple times and approved by both the legal and editorial departments, ensuring accuracy while providing clear context for viewers who might not be familiar with every aspect of the ongoing investigations. In the makeup room, Pam Bondi sat perfectly still as makeup artist Roberto Martinez applied the final touches to her appearance. Unlike Cooper's earlier session, Bondi's preparation was subdued, almost meditative. She seemed to be conserving her energy for what lay ahead, her mind focused on the task at hand. Roberto had worked with countless political figures over the years, and he recognized the signs of someone preparing for battle: the controlled breathing, the steady gaze, the almost preternatural calm that often preceded moments of high drama. Bondi's choice of wardrobe had been carefully considered: a navy blue blazer that projected authority without appearing overly aggressive, minimal jewelry that wouldn't distract from her words, and subtle makeup that enhanced her natural features without appearing overly produced. Every detail had been chosen to support her credibility and ensure that the focus remained on her message rather than her appearance. Dr. Chun sat in the green room adjacent to the studio, her laptop closed now that the final preparations were complete. She had spent the past hour reviewing the key talking points one last time, though both women knew that once the interview began, they would need to rely on instinct and years of experience rather than predetermined scripts. The documents in Bondi's possession were too explosive, too complex, to be reduced to simple sound bites, and Chun understood that the success of their mission would depend largely on Bondi's ability to present the information in a way that was both compelling and credible. The green room itself was designed to be calming soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and neutral colors that would help guests relax before their on-air appearances. But tonight, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Production assistants moved quietly through the space, checking on last-minute details and ensuring that everything was in place for what everyone sensed would be a memorable broadcast. As 8 p.m. approached, the energy throughout the CNN center reached a crescendo. In newsrooms across the country, assignment editors were preparing their teams to respond quickly to whatever news might emerge from the interview. Social media managers were positioned at their workstations, ready to push out clips and quotes that would amplify the network's coverage across digital platforms. The machinery of modern journalism was primed and ready, though no one could have anticipated the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Cooper made his way from the makeup room to Studio 7, his movements deliberate and focused. He carried himself with the confidence that came from decades of experience, but those who knew him well could detect subtle signs of the adrenaline that preceded his most important interviews. His producer Marcus walked alongside him, providing final updates and reminders, though both men understood that once the cameras rolled, Cooper would need to rely on his instincts and journalistic training. The walk to the studio took them through the heart of the CNN newsroom. Past desks where correspondents and producers were tracking breaking news from around the world. The familiar sounds and sights of the newsroom provided a comforting backdrop, the constant murmur of conversations, the glow of computer screens, the organized chaos that characterized modern television journalism. This was Cooper's natural habitat, the environment where he had built his reputation and established himself as one of the most respected voices in American media. In the final minutes before airtime, Pam Bondi was escorted from the green room to Studio 7 by a production assistant. The journey was brief but significant, a transition from private preparation to public performance, from careful planning to live execution. As she entered the studio, the full weight of what she was about to do settled upon her shoulders. The photo, bright lights, the imposing cameras, the sense of being watched by millions of people across the country, all of it combined to create an atmosphere that was both exhilarating and intimidating. Cooper rose from his desk to greet his guest, extending his hand in the professional courtesy that marked the beginning of countless interviews. But as their eyes met, both participants in the drama about to unfold sensed that this would be unlike any conversation either had experienced before. The manila folder containing Bondi's explosive documents sat discreetly beside her chair, its innocuous appearance belying the political dynamite it contained. The final technical checks were completed with military precision. Camera operators confirmed their positions, audio levels were verified one last time, and the control room ran through the opening sequence to ensure smooth execution. Director Patricia Kim surveyed her domain from the control room, surrounded by monitors displaying multiple camera angles, graphics packages ready for deployment, and real-time social media feeds that would track audience reaction as the interview progressed. In living rooms across America, viewers were settling in for what they expected to be another hard-hitting interview from one of cable news's most respected programs. Many were drawn by the promise of new insights into the ongoing political investigations that had dominated headlines for months. Others tuned in specifically to see how Bondi would handle Cooper's notoriously thorough questioning. None of them could have anticipated that they were about to witness a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The opening theme music began to play, its familiar notes signaling the start of another edition of Anderson Cooper 360. In the control room, Director Kim cued the graphics package that would introduce the evening's lead story while Cooper settled into his chair and focused on the camera that would carry his words to millions of viewers. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on a performance that would reshape the political landscape and leave even the most seasoned journalists struggling to comprehend what they had witnessed. As the red recording light illuminated and Cooper began his opening remarks, introducing the evening's guest and the topics they would discuss, Pam Bondi sat perfectly still, her hands folded calmly in her lap, the manila folder within easy reach. She listened to Cooper's introduction with the focused attention of someone who understood that the next hour would determine not just her own political future, but potentially the fate of several high-profile figures whose careers hung in the balance. The interview was about to begin, but already the atmosphere in Studio 7 felt different from the routine political conversations that typically filled the primetime hours. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something significant was about to happen, though none of the participants, not Cooper, not the production team, not even Bondi herself, could have fully anticipated the magnitude of the revelation that was about to explode across America's television screens and reshape the political conversation for months to come. The crimson recording light cast an ominous glow across Studio 7 as Anderson Cooper's voice filled the space with its characteristic measured authority. His opening remarks flowed with the practiced ease of someone who had conducted thousands of interviews. But tonight something felt different in the way his words seemed to hang in the air a fraction longer than usual. The camera captured every nuance of his expression as he introduced his guest, the slight tension around his eyes suggesting he sensed the undercurrent of electricity that had been building throughout the day. Pam Bondi sat across from him with the stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her posture was relaxed yet alert, her hands resting calmly on the armrests of her chair, while the manila folder lay within easy reach on the small table beside her. The studio lights reflected off her navy blazer, creating subtle shadows that seemed to shift with each barely perceptible movement. She listened to Cooper's introduction with the focused attention of someone who understood that the words being spoken were merely the prelude to a much larger symphony. In the control room, Director Patricia Kim watched the proceedings through a bank of monitors that displayed multiple camera angles simultaneously. Her experienced eye tracked the subtle dynamics between host and guest, noting the way Bondi's gaze remained fixed on Cooper even as he addressed the camera directly. The technical crew moved with silent efficiency around her, each person focused on their specific role in bringing the interview to millions of viewers across the country. The atmosphere was professional yet charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to vibrate with potential energy. Cooper concluded his opening remarks and turned his full attention to his guest, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that had made him one of the most feared interviewers in television journalism. The first question came with surgical precision, designed to establish the parameters of their conversation while probing for any signs of weakness or evasion. He asked about her current role in the ongoing federal investigations, his tone respectful but firm, leaving no doubt that he expected direct answers to direct questions. Bondi's response was measured and thoughtful, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of legal experience and political combat. She acknowledged the gravity of the investigations while carefully avoiding any statements that might compromise ongoing proceedings. Her words were chosen with the precision of someone who understood that every syllable would be analyzed and dissected by pundits and opponents alike. But beneath the careful legal language, there was an undercurrent of something else, a suggestion that she possessed information that went far beyond what was already public knowledge. The conversation continued through several exchanges, with Cooper probing deeper into specific aspects of the investigations while Bondi provided responses that were technically accurate but strategically limited. To the casual observer, it appeared to be a typical high-level political interview, the kind of careful dance between journalist and subject that characterize most prime-time news programs. But those who knew both participants well could sense the underlying tension, the feeling that both were holding back their most potent ammunition for the right moment. Dr. Sarah Chun watched from the green room, her laptop closed now that the interview had begun. She had spent months helping Bondi prepare for this moment, and she recognized the subtle signs that indicated her colleague was ready to transition from defensive responses to offensive revelation. The documents they had so carefully compiled and verified represented more than just evidence of wrongdoing. They constituted a roadmap of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Chun understood that once Bondi began to reveal their contents, there would be no controlling the resulting firestorm. Cooper shifted tactics, moving from general questions about the investigations to more specific inquiries about Bondi's own involvement and observations. His questions became sharper, more pointed, designed to force her into positions where evasion would become impossible. He referenced specific dates and meetings, challenging her to provide details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the proceedings would possess. The tempo of the interview began to accelerate, and viewers could sense that the real confrontation was finally beginning. In newsrooms across the country, assignment editors and producers leaned closer to their monitors as they recognized the shift in dynamics. The routine political interview was transforming into something more significant, though none of them could yet anticipate the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Social media feeds began to register increased activity as politically engaged viewers started sharing clips and commentary, their posts reflecting a growing sense that something important was happening in real time. Bondi's responses became more direct as Cooper's questions intensified. She began to reference specific incidents and conversations that had not been previously reported, providing details that suggested her knowledge went far beyond what she had publicly acknowledged. Her legal background served her well as she navigated the complex terrain between revealing significant information and avoiding statements that might compromise ongoing legal proceedings. But with each answer, she moved closer to the moment when she would cross the line from witness to whistleblower. The control room buzzed with quiet activity as producers recognized that the interview was beginning to generate the kind of content that could dominate news cycles for days or weeks. Director Kim made subtle adjustments to camera angles, ensuring that viewers would be able to see every facial expression and gesture as the conversation intensified. The technical crew remained focused on their equipment, but the tension in the room was palpable as everyone sensed they were witnessing something potentially historic. Cooper pressed harder, challenging Bondi to explain apparent contradictions between her public statements and information that had emerged through other sources. His questions became more confrontational, though he maintained the professional demeanor that had made him one of the most respected figures in television journalism. He referenced documents and testimony that seemed to contradict some of Bondi's previous characterizations, forcing her to choose between maintaining her carefully constructed narrative or acknowledging uncomfortable truths. The moment of transition came suddenly and without warning. Cooper asked a seemingly routine question about timeline discrepancies, expecting another carefully crafted response that would advance the conversation without revealing anything truly significant. Instead, Bondi paused for a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, her eyes never leaving his face as she appeared to make a decision that would change everything. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new quality, a sense of resolve. That indicated she was about to abandon caution in favor of truth. She reached for the manila folder beside her chair with deliberate slowness, her movements watched by millions of viewers who had no idea they were about to witness a moment that would reshape American politics. The folder itself appeared innocuous, but Bondi handled it with the reverence of someone who understood its explosive contents. She opened it carefully, extracting a single document that she placed on the table between herself and Cooper with ceremonial precision. Cooper's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as he recognized that the dynamics of their conversation had fundamentally changed. His journalistic instincts told him that Bondi was about to reveal something significant, but years of experience had taught him to maintain his composure regardless of what surprises his guests might spring on him. He leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on the document and the woman who had just placed it between them like a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. The document itself was unremarkable in appearance, several pages of what appeared to be official correspondence, clipped together with a simple metal fastener. But as Bondi began to describe its contents, the magnitude of its implications became clear. She spoke with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, outlining a pattern of communications and financial arrangements that had been hidden from public view. Her voice remained steady, but the words she spoke carried the weight of accusations that could topple governments. In the control room, the atmosphere grew electric as producers realized they were witnessing the kind of breaking news that defined careers and changed the trajectory of national conversations. Director Kim made rapid adjustments to ensure that both the document and Bondi's face remained clearly visible to viewers, while technical assistants prepared graphics and lower third information that would help audiences understand the significance of what they were hearing. The machinery of television journalism shifted into crisis mode, responding to developments that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Cooper's response was measured but clearly shaken. His questions became more probing as he sought to understand the full implications of what Bondi was revealing. He asked for clarification on dates and participants, challenging her to provide additional details that would substantiate her claims. But even as he maintained his professional skepticism, viewers could see that he was struggling to process the magnitude of what was being revealed. The silver-haired anchor who had faced down world leaders and survived natural disasters appeared genuinely stunned by the revelations unfolding before him. Bondi continued her methodical presentation, extracting additional documents from the folder and placing them on the table with the precision of someone building an irrefutable case. Each piece of evidence added another layer to a story of corruption and abuse of power that reached far beyond what anyone had previously suspected. She spoke of secret meetings and hidden financial arrangements, of communications that revealed a web of relationships that violated both legal and ethical boundaries. Her words painted a picture of systematic corruption that implicated figures at the highest levels of government and business. The scope of the allegations expanded with each revelation, encompassing not just the individuals currently under investigation, but a broader network of conspirators who had managed to avoid public scrutiny. Bondi described communication patterns and financial flows that suggested coordination between parties who publicly claimed to have no relationship with one another. She referenced dates and locations that could be verified, providing the kind of specific details that distinguished credible accusations from mere speculation. Dr. Chun watched from the green room as her months of careful preparation and investigation played out on live television. She had helped Bondi verify every document and cross-reference every claim, building a case that would withstand the intense scrutiny that was certain to follow. The decision to reveal this information on live television, rather than through traditional law enforcement channels, had been strategic and carefully considered. They understood that once the information became public, it would be impossible for anyone to suppress or manipulate the investigation that would inevitably follow. Cooper struggled to maintain his composure as the full scope of Bondi's allegations became clear. His questions became more urgent, more pointed, as he sought to understand not just what she was claiming, but how she had obtained such detailed information about activities that were supposedly secret. He challenged her credibility and her motives, fulfilling his journalistic obligation to scrutinize extraordinary claims with extraordinary skepticism. But even as he pressed her for additional details and corroboration, it was clear that the sheer volume and specificity of her evidence was overwhelming his ability to dismiss it outright. The interview continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only minutes, with Bondi methodically laying out a case that grew more damning with each revelation. She spoke of recorded conversations and financial documents that painted a picture of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Her presentation was clinical and precise, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent decades prosecuting complex cases and understood the importance of building irrefutable evidence. Social media exploded as viewers shared clips and commentary in real time, their posts reflecting shock, disbelief, and growing anger at the implications of what was being revealed. The hashtags began trending within minutes of Bondi's first major revelation, and the story began to take on a life of its own as it spread across digital platforms. News organizations that had been monitoring the interview began preparing their own coverage, recognizing that they were witnessing a story that would dominate headlines for weeks or months to come. In the control room, producers scrambled to extend the interview beyond its scheduled time slot, recognizing that they were witnessing the kind of breaking news that demanded immediate and comprehensive coverage. Director Kim coordinated with network executives to clear programming and provide additional time for what had become a historic revelation. The technical crew worked with increased intensity, ensuring that every word and gesture was captured with perfect clarity for an audience that was growing by the minute as word of the bombshell spread across social media and cable news networks. Cooper's questions became more desperate as he struggled to comprehend the full implications of what Bondi was revealing. He challenged her on specific details, demanding additional evidence and corroboration for claims that seemed almost too explosive to believe. But Bondi met each challenge with additional documentation and specific details that suggested her allegations were not only true, but represented only a fraction of what she had discovered through her investigation. The atmosphere in Studio 7 had transformed completely from the professional courtesy that had marked the interview's beginning. Cooper appeared genuinely shaken, his usual composure cracking under the weight of revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about the political landscape. Bondi, meanwhile, seemed to gain strength and confidence with each revelation, as if the act of finally speaking the truth had liberated her from months of careful silence and strategic positioning. The documents continued to pile up on the table. Between them, each one representing another piece of evidence in what was rapidly becoming the most significant political scandal in decades. Bondi spoke of communications that revealed coordination between supposed enemies, of financial arrangements that violated campaign finance laws, and of cover-up efforts that implicated senior officials in multiple government agencies. Her revelations painted a picture of corruption that was both broader and deeper than anything that had been previously suspected. Network executives across the country began receiving urgent calls from government officials and political operatives, all seeking to understand the implications of what was being broadcast live to millions of viewers. The traditional mechanisms for managing political crises seemed inadequate in the face of revelations that were unfolding in real time, beyond the control of spin doctors and damage control specialists. The story was taking on a momentum of its own, driven by the explosive nature of the evidence and the credibility of the source presenting it. Cooper's final questions before the commercial break reflected his struggle to process what he had just witnessed. His voice carried a note of uncertainty that was rarely heard from the veteran journalist, and his facial expressions revealed the internal conflict between professional skepticism and growing realization that he was witnessing something genuinely historic. As the cameras prepared to cut away for the break, Viewers could see that both participants in this extraordinary conversation understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The commercial break lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, but for everyone inside CNN's Atlanta headquarters, it felt like an eternity suspended between the old world and whatever came next. In Studio 7, Anderson Cooper sat motionless at his desk, his eyes fixed on the documents scattered across the table, while Pam Bondi remained perfectly composed, as if she had just discussed the weather rather than detonated the most explosive political scandal in modern American history. The makeup artist rushed onto the set to touch up Cooper's appearance, but her hands trembled slightly as she applied powder to his forehead, and even she seemed to understand that she was witnessing something that would be remembered long after. Her career had ended. Behind the cameras, the technical crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they had just witnessed. Sound engineer Miguel Santos checked his equipment one final time, ensuring that every word of what was about to come would be captured with perfect clarity for the history books. The camera operators adjusted their positions slightly, their instincts telling them that the second half of this interview would be even more explosive than the first. Director Patricia Kim spoke in hushed tones with her assistant director, coordinating camera angles and preparing for contingencies that no rundown could have anticipated. In the control room, chaos reigned beneath a veneer of professional competence. Producers frantically coordinated with network executives who were fielding calls from Washington, New York, and newsrooms across the country. The phone banks lit up like Christmas trees as reporters, political operatives, and government officials all sought to understand the implications of what had just been broadcast to the nation. Senior producer Marcus Rodriguez found himself at the center of a storm that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control or contain. The network's legal department had been activated within minutes of Bondi's first major revelation, with attorneys scrambling to review the statements that had already been broadcast and prepare for the potential legal ramifications of what might come next. Chief Legal Counsel Amanda Foster paced her office while speaking rapidly into her phone, coordinating with external law firms that specialized in media law and First Amendment protections. The documents that Bondi had presented appeared genuine, but the scope of her allegations was so broad that verification would take weeks or months, not the minutes available before the cameras rolled again. Social media platforms experienced unprecedented traffic spikes as viewers shared clips, commentary, and analysis in real time. The trending algorithms struggled to keep pace with the volume of engagement, and the story began to take on a life of its own across digital platforms. Twitter servers strained under the load as millions of users attempted to process and respond to what they had just witnessed. Facebook groups formed spontaneously to discuss the implications, while YouTube creators prepared emergency content to capitalize on the moment that everyone sensed would define the political conversation for months to come. Government officials across Washington watched the broadcast with growing alarm, recognizing that Bondi's revelations would trigger investigations, hearings, and political consequences that would reshape the landscape for years to come. In the White House Situation Room, senior advisors huddled around monitors while fielding urgent calls from congressional leaders, cabinet officials, and foreign allies who were all seeking to understand the implications of allegations that reached into the highest levels of government. The traditional mechanisms for crisis management seemed inadequate in the face of revelations that were unfolding live on television, beyond the reach of spin doctors and damage control specialists. The Justice Department activated emergency protocols typically reserved for national security crises, with senior officials convening secure video conferences to assess the implications of Bondi's allegations. FBI field offices across the country received urgent communications, directing them to preserve evidence and prepare for expanded investigations that would likely require hundreds of agents and consume years of resources. The scope of the potential conspiracy that Bondi had outlined suggested a level of corruption that would challenge every institution of American democracy. Congressional leaders from both parties found themselves in the unprecedented position of responding to breaking news that implicated their colleagues and potentially themselves. House Speaker Rebecca Martinez watched the broadcast from her Capitol Hill office while fielding calls from committee chairs who were already discussing subpoenas, hearings, and special investigations. Senate Majority Leader David Chun canceled his evening fundraiser and convened an emergency meeting with his leadership team, recognizing that the political landscape had fundamentally shifted in the span of a single interview. International allies and adversaries monitored the broadcast with equal intensity, understanding that the allegations Bondi had presented could reshape American foreign policy and international relationships for decades to come. Embassy staff across the globe prepared urgent cables for their home governments, while intelligence agencies analyzed the implications of revelations that suggested American government officials had been compromised by foreign entities. The geopolitical ramifications of Bondi's allegations would ripple across continents and potentially destabilize alliances that had been decades in the making. As the commercial break neared its end, Cooper attempted to regain his composure while grappling with the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. His decades of experience in journalism had prepared him for many things, but nothing in his career had equipped him to handle revelations of this scope and significance. The silver-haired anchor who had faced down dictators and survived natural disasters found himself genuinely shaken by allegations that challenged everything he thought he knew about American governance and the rule of law. The red recording light illuminated once again, and Cooper's voice carried a new quality as he resumed the interview. Gone was the measured authority that had characterized his opening remarks, replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable, as if he too was struggling to comprehend the implications of what was unfolding before him. His first question after the break was direct and unflinching, demanding that Bondi provide additional details about the most explosive of her allegations. But even as he fulfilled his journalistic obligation to challenge and verify, viewers could see that he was operating in uncharted territory. Bondi responded with the same methodical precision that had characterized her earlier revelations, but now there was an added element of urgency in her voice, as if she understood that time was running out to present her full case before external forces moved to suppress or discredit her evidence. She reached into the manila folder once again, extracting documents that she claimed proved direct financial relationships between high-ranking government officials and foreign entities that were supposedly adversaries of the United States. The new documents painted an even more disturbing picture than what had already been revealed. Bondi spoke of bank account records that showed regular payments from shell companies connected to hostile foreign governments, of communication intercepts that revealed coordination between American officials and foreign intelligence services, and of policy decisions that had been influenced by financial considerations rather than national security interests. Her presentation was clinical and devastating, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent months verifying every detail and preparing for exactly this moment. Cooper struggled to maintain his professional skepticism as the evidence mounted, but the sheer volume and specificity of Bondi's documentation was overwhelming. He challenged her on the authenticity of the documents and the reliability of her sources, but she met each question with additional corroboration and cross-references that suggested her allegations were not only true but represented a systematic pattern of corruption that had been ongoing for years. The veteran journalist found himself in the unprecedented position of conducting an interview that was simultaneously breaking news and potentially rewriting American history. The control room operated in controlled chaos as producers coordinated with graphics departments to create visual aids that would help viewers understand the complex relationships and financial flows that Bondi was describing. Director Kim made rapid decisions about camera angles and timing, ensuring that both the documents and the speakers remained clearly visible as the revelations continued to unfold. The technical crew worked with increased intensity, understanding that they were capturing moments that would be analyzed and dissected for decades to come. Dr. Sarah Chun watched from the green room as months of careful investigation and preparation played out on live television. She had helped Bondi verify every document and trace every financial connection, building a case that would withstand the intense scrutiny that was certain to follow. The decision to reveal this information on live television rather than through traditional law enforcement channels had been strategic and carefully considered, designed to prevent the suppression or manipulation that might have occurred if they had followed conventional procedures. Bondi's revelations continued to expand in scope and significance, encompassing not just individual acts of corruption, but what appeared to be a coordinated effort to undermine American democracy from within. She spoke of election interference that went far beyond what had been previously reported, of judicial appointments that had been influenced by foreign money, and of legislative priorities that had been shaped by considerations that had nothing to do with American interests. Her allegations painted a picture of a government that had been systematically compromised by hostile foreign actors working through American intermediaries. The implications of these revelations were staggering, suggesting that fundamental assumptions about American governance and the integrity of democratic institutions would need to be reconsidered. Cooper pressed for additional details and corroboration, but with each question, Bondi provided evidence that seemed to confirm her most disturbing allegations. The interview had transcended typical political discourse and entered territory that challenged the very foundations of American democracy. Social media engagement reached unprecedented levels as viewers shared clips and commentary that spread across platforms faster than traditional news organizations could respond. The hashtags associated with the interview began trending globally, and the story took on international significance as foreign news organizations picked up the feed and began their own analysis of the implications. The traditional news cycle had been completely disrupted by revelations that were unfolding in real time, beyond the control of editors and news directors who typically manage the flow of information. Government officials found themselves responding to allegations that were being broadcast live, without the usual opportunity to prepare statements or coordinate responses through traditional channels. The White House press office was inundated with requests for comment on accusations that implicated senior administration officials, while congressional leaders faced demands for immediate investigations and hearings. The normal processes of government seemed inadequate to address allegations of this magnitude and complexity. Law enforcement agencies activated emergency protocols as they recognized that Bondi's allegations would require massive investigations that could consume years and involve hundreds of agents. The FBI director convened an emergency meeting with senior leadership to assess the implications and begin preliminary planning for what could become the largest corruption investigation in American history. The scope of the potential conspiracy suggested that multiple field offices and specialized units would need to be coordinated in an effort that would challenge the Bureau's resources and capabilities. International intelligence services began their own assessments of Bondi's allegations, recognizing that the accusations of foreign interference and influence operations could reshape global relationships and intelligence cooperation agreements. Allied nations that had been implicated in the financial networks that Bondi described faced the prospect of diplomatic crises and potential sanctions, while adversarial nations prepared for increased scrutiny of their activities and relationships with American officials. The financial markets began to react even before the interview concluded, with futures trading showing increased volatility as investors attempted to assess the implications of allegations that could reshape the political landscape and trigger massive investigations. Currency values fluctuated as international investors reconsidered their exposure to American markets and institutions that might be affected by the scandal that was unfolding in real time. As the interview entered its final phase, Cooper made one last attempt to challenge Bondi's credibility and demand additional verification of her most explosive claims. But her responses continued to be precise and well-documented, supported by evidence that appeared to corroborate even her most disturbing allegations. The veteran journalist found himself in the position of having to accept that he was witnessing the revelation of what might be the greatest political scandal in American history. Bondi's final statements carried the weight of someone who understood that she had just changed the course of American history. She spoke directly to the camera, addressing the millions of viewers who had witnessed her revelations and challenging them to demand accountability from their elected officials and institutions. Her voice carried a combination of satisfaction and exhaustion, as if the act of finally revealing the truth had both liberated and drained her of the energy that had sustained her through months of careful investigation and preparation. The interview concluded with Cooper's closing remarks, but his usual authoritative summary seemed inadequate to capture the magnitude of what had just transpired. His voice carried notes of uncertainty and shock that were rarely heard from the veteran anchor, and his facial expressions revealed the internal struggle between professional skepticism and growing recognition that he had just witnessed something genuinely historic. As the cameras prepared to cut away, viewers could see that both participants understood that nothing would ever be the same again. In the immediate aftermath of the broadcast, CNN's newsroom exploded into activity as reporters and producers scrambled to follow up on Bondi's allegations and begin the process of verification and investigation that would consume the network's resources for months to come. Assignment editors coordinated with correspondents across the country to begin tracking down sources and documents that could corroborate or challenge the claims that had just been broadcast to the nation. The story had taken on a momentum of its own, driven by the explosive nature of the allegations and the credibility of the source who had presented them. Government officials across Washington began the process of damage assessment and crisis management, recognizing that Bondi's allegations would trigger investigations, hearings, and political consequences that would reshape the landscape for years to come. The traditional mechanisms for managing political scandals seemed inadequate in the face of revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions about American governance and democratic institutions. The scope of the potential corruption suggested that entire agencies and branches of government might need to be restructured or reformed. Legal experts and constitutional scholars began analyzing the implications of Bondi's allegations, recognizing that the accusations of foreign influence and systematic corruption could trigger constitutional crises that would test the resilience of American democratic institutions. Law schools across the country prepared emergency seminars and symposiums to discuss the legal and constitutional implications of what might be the greatest challenge to American democracy since the Civil War. International allies and adversaries began reassessing their relationships with the United States, understanding that Bondi's allegations could reshape American foreign policy and international cooperation agreements for decades to come. Embassy staff prepared urgent communications for their home governments, while intelligence agencies analyzed the implications of revelations that suggested American government officials had been systematically compromised by foreign entities. The investigation and verification process that would follow Bondi's revelations promised to consume years and involve hundreds of investigators, prosecutors, and analysts. The scope of the alleged conspiracy suggested that multiple agencies and jurisdictions would need to coordinate their efforts in ways that had never been attempted before. The challenge of verifying and prosecuting allegations of this magnitude would test every aspect of the American justice system and potentially require new legal frameworks and investigative procedures. As news of the interview spread across the globe, international media organizations began their own coverage and analysis of the implications for global politics and economics. The allegations of foreign interference and influence operations had implications that extended far beyond American borders, potentially affecting international trade agreements, military alliances, and diplomatic relationships that had been decades in the making. The financial implications of Bondi's allegations began to manifest in international markets as investors attempted to assess the potential impact on American economic stability and global financial systems. The accusations of systematic corruption and foreign influence suggested that fundamental assumptions about American governance and regulatory oversight would need to be reconsidered by investors and financial institutions worldwide. Academic institutions across the country began preparing special programs and research initiatives to study the implications of what might be the greatest political scandal in American history. Political science departments, law schools, and public policy programs recognized that Bondi's allegations would provide case studies and research opportunities that could reshape understanding of democratic governance, corruption, and institutional resilience for generations to come. The social and cultural implications of Bondi's revelations promised to be as significant as the political and legal consequences. Public trust in democratic institutions, which had already been strained by years of political polarization and scandal, faced the prospect of further erosion as citizens grappled with allegations that challenged fundamental assumptions about American governance and the rule of law. The revelation that senior officials might have been systematically compromised by foreign entities would force Americans to reconsider their understanding of patriotism, loyalty, and democratic accountability. As the immediate shock of Bondi's revelations began to give way to the longer process of investigation and verification, it became clear that the interview had marked a turning point in American history. The allegations were so broad and fundamental that they would require a complete reassessment of American institutions and democratic processes. The investigation and reform process that would follow promised to be as significant as any challenge that American democracy had faced since its founding. The interview concluded with both participants understanding that they had just participated in a moment that would define American politics for generations to come. Cooper's final words carried the weight of someone who recognized that he had just witnessed history in the making, while Bondi's composed demeanor suggested the satisfaction of someone who had finally fulfilled a duty that had been weighing on her for months. As the studio lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, both understood that the easy part was over and that the real work of accountability and reform was just beginning. The immediate aftermath in Studio 7 was subdued, almost anticlimactic. After the explosive nature of what had just transpired, Bondi carefully gathered her documents while Cooper sat in contemplative silence, both participants seeming to understand that they had just crossed a line from which there could be no return. The technical crew began the process of shutting down equipment while casting furtive glances at the two figures who had just reshaped American history in the span of a single hour. In living rooms across America, families gathered around television sets struggled to process what they had just witnessed, understanding instinctively that they had been present for a moment that would be remembered and analyzed for decades to come. Parents attempted to explain to children why what they had just seen was so significant, while adults grappled with the implications of allegations that challenged everything they thought they knew about their government and democratic institutions. The story that had begun as a routine political interview had evolved into something far more significant, a revelation that would trigger investigations, reforms, and constitutional challenges that would define American politics for years to come. As the participants left Studio 7 and disappeared into the Atlanta night, they understood that they had just initiated a process that would test every aspect of American democracy and potentially reshape the relationship between citizens and their government for generations to come. The weeks following the explosive CNN interview became known as the reckoning period in American political history, a time when the very foundations of democratic governance faced their most severe test since the Constitutional Convention. In the corridors of power across Washington, the reverberations of Pam Bondi's revelations continued to shake institutions that had stood for centuries, forcing a complete reassessment of how American democracy functioned and who could be trusted to protect it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation found itself at the center of a storm unlike anything in its storied history. Director Rebecca Thompson convened emergency sessions with her senior staff, recognizing that the allegations Bondi had presented would require the largest and most complex investigation the Bureau had ever undertaken. The scope of the potential conspiracy was so vast that it would necessitate the creation of entirely new task forces and investigative protocols. Field offices across the country received urgent directives to begin preliminary inquiries while preserving evidence that might be crucial to understanding the full extent of the corruption that had been exposed. Special Agent Maria Vasquez, a 20-year veteran of white-collar crime investigations, found herself appointed to lead the newly formed Institutional Integrity Task Force, a unit that would eventually grow to include over 300 agents, analysts, and support staff. Her first briefing with Director Thompson lasted nearly 6 hours as they attempted to chart a course through the most complex investigation in FBI history. The documents that Bondi had presented were just the beginning, providing roadmaps to hidden networks of corruption that extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. The task force established operations centers in Washington, New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, with specialized units focusing on different aspects of the conspiracy that Bondi had exposed. Financial crime specialists worked around the clock to trace the money flows that connected American officials to foreign entities, while counterintelligence experts analyzed communication patterns that suggested systematic infiltration of government agencies. The investigation would eventually require cooperation with international law enforcement agencies and intelligence services, creating diplomatic challenges that had never been encountered before. Congressional leaders found themselves facing unprecedented pressure to respond to allegations that implicated dozens of their colleagues and called into question the integrity of the legislative process itself. House Speaker Rebecca Martinez announced the formation of a bipartisan select committee to investigate the allegations. But even this extraordinary step seemed inadequate given the scope of what Bondi had revealed. The committee would eventually require a staff of over 100 investigators, lawyers, and analysts, making it larger than most permanent congressional committees. Senator David Chun, the majority leader who had initially dismissed Bondi's allegations as political theater, found himself in the uncomfortable position of overseeing investigations that would likely implicate members of his own party. The political calculations that had dominated Washington for decades seemed irrelevant in the face of allegations that transcended partisan boundaries and threatened the fundamental legitimacy of democratic institutions. Chun's private conversations with fellow senators revealed a growing sense that the traditional rules of political engagement had been permanently altered. The White House struggled to maintain normal operations while facing the most serious constitutional crisis since Watergate. Chief of Staff Amanda Foster coordinated daily briefings with cabinet officials, trying to assess which agencies and departments might be compromised by the corruption that Bondi had exposed. The traditional mechanisms for crisis management seemed inadequate when the crisis potentially involved the very officials who would normally be responsible for managing it. Presidential advisors found themselves in the surreal position of investigating their own colleagues and questioning the loyalty of people they had worked with for years. International allies watched the unfolding crisis with a mixture of concern and opportunity, recognizing that American political instability could reshape global power dynamics for decades to come. The NATO alliance faced particular challenges. as revelations emerged suggesting that some member nations had been involved in the influence operations that Bondi had described. Emergency sessions at Alliance headquarters in Brussels became exercises in damage control as officials attempted to preserve relationships that had been decades in the making while addressing allegations that called into question the fundamental trust that underpinned international cooperation. The European Union activated its own investigation protocols as evidence emerged suggesting that some of the financial networks Bondi had exposed extended into European banking systems and regulatory agencies. The implications for transatlantic trade relationships and financial cooperation were staggering, with European officials recognizing that they might need to fundamentally reassess their economic and political relationships with the United States. The crisis that had begun with a single interview was metastasizing into a global challenge that would test international institutions and agreements. Financial markets around the world struggled to process the implications of allegations that suggested systematic corruption at the highest levels of American government. The dollar faced unprecedented volatility as investors grappled with questions about the stability and reliability of American institutions that had been considered bedrock foundations of the global economy. Central banks from London to Tokyo convened emergency sessions to coordinate responses to what was rapidly becoming a crisis of confidence in American governance and regulatory oversight. The investigation process itself became a source of additional controversy as questions arose about who could be trusted to conduct impartial inquiries when the allegations potentially implicated the very agencies responsible for law enforcement and oversight. The appointment of special prosecutors and independent investigators became exercises in political archaeology as officials attempted to identify individuals whose integrity and independence could withstand the intense scrutiny that would inevitably follow. The traditional processes of American justice faced their most severe test as they struggled to address allegations that challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which those processes were based. Media organizations across the country found themselves in the unprecedented position of covering a story that was simultaneously unfolding and reshaping the very industry they worked in. The traditional relationship between journalists and government sources was fundamentally altered when those sources might themselves be subjects of investigation. News organizations invested unprecedented resources in verification efforts, creating specialized teams to analyze the documents and evidence that continued to emerge from the investigation that Bondi's revelations had triggered. CNN itself became both a news organization covering the story and a subject of the story, as questions arose about how the network had obtained access to Bondi and whether other news organizations had been offered similar opportunities to break the story. The journalism ethics questions raised by the interview created new challenges for an industry already struggling with issues of credibility and public trust. Media critics and journalism schools began analyzing the interview as a case study in the responsibilities and risks associated with breaking news of this magnitude. Academic institutions found themselves at the center of national discussions about democratic governance, constitutional law, and institutional reform. Political science departments that had spent decades studying theoretical questions about democratic resilience suddenly found themselves confronting real-world challenges that tested every assumption about how American government was supposed to function. Law schools created emergency courses to address the constitutional questions raised by Bondi's allegations, while public policy programs struggled to develop frameworks for understanding and addressing systematic institutional corruption. The social and cultural implications of the scandal extended far beyond the immediate political consequences, touching every aspect of American life and forcing citizens to reconsider fundamental assumptions about their government and society. Public opinion polls revealed unprecedented levels of distrust in government institutions, but also surprising resilience in support for democratic values and constitutional principles. The crisis was simultaneously undermining confidence in specific institutions while strengthening commitment to the ideals those institutions were supposed to represent. Religious leaders across the country found themselves addressing congregations struggling to understand how corruption of this magnitude could have occurred in institutions they had been taught to respect and trust. The scandal raised fundamental questions about moral leadership and ethical responsibility that transcended political boundaries and touched the core values that many Americans considered essential to their national identity. Churches, synagogues, mosques, and other religious institutions became forums for discussions about accountability, redemption, and the possibility of institutional renewal. Educational institutions at every level faced the challenge of explaining to students how American democracy could function when its fundamental institutions were called into question. High school civics teachers found their lesson plans obsolete as they struggled to address student questions about whether the government they were learning about was the same government that had been exposed by Bondi's revelations. College professors postponed examinations and rewrote syllabi to address questions that had never been contemplated in traditional academic frameworks. The investigation process itself became a subject of intense public scrutiny as citizens demanded transparency and accountability from the very agencies responsible for uncovering the truth about institutional corruption. The FBI's Institutional Integrity Task Force faced the unprecedented challenge of conducting investigations while maintaining public confidence in an agency that had itself been implicated in some of the activities that Bondi had exposed. Special Agent Vasquez found herself regularly briefing congressional committees and participating in public forums designed to maintain transparency while protecting the integrity of ongoing investigations. International law enforcement cooperation became essential as investigators traced financial networks and communication patterns that extended across multiple continents and jurisdictions. The complexity of the investigation required unprecedented coordination between American agencies and their counterparts in dozens of countries, creating diplomatic and legal challenges that had never been encountered before. Traditional extradition, treaties, and information sharing agreements proved inadequate for addressing a conspiracy of this scope and sophistication. The technology industry found itself unexpectedly central to the investigation as evidence emerged suggesting that some of the corruption networks had exploited digital communication platforms and financial systems to conceal their activities. Major technology companies were compelled to cooperate with investigators while facing questions about their own role in enabling the activities that Bondi had exposed. The investigation revealed vulnerabilities in digital infrastructure that had implications far beyond the immediate scandal, forcing a fundamental reassessment of cybersecurity and digital governance frameworks. As months passed and the investigation expanded, the full scope of what Bondi had revealed became increasingly clear. The corruption she had exposed was not simply a matter of individual bad actors or isolated incidents, but rather a systematic infiltration of American institutions that had been ongoing for years. The financial networks, communication patterns, and coordination mechanisms she had documented represented a level of organization and sophistication that challenged every assumption about how such activities could be detected and prevented. The reform process that emerged from the investigation promised to be as significant as the corruption itself, requiring fundamental changes to how American government operated and how democratic institutions protected themselves from infiltration and compromise. Congressional committees began drafting legislation that would create new oversight mechanisms, strengthen accountability requirements, and establish safeguards against the kind of systematic corruption that Bondi had exposed. The reforms under consideration were so extensive that they would effectively constitute a restructuring of American governance comparable to the changes that followed the Civil War or the Great Depression. The personal cost to those involved In both, the corruption and its exposure became increasingly apparent as the investigation progressed. Several high-ranking officials faced criminal charges that could result in decades of imprisonment, while others saw their careers and reputations destroyed by associations with activities they claimed to have been unaware of. Bondi herself faced both praise and condemnation for her decision to reveal the information publicly, rather than working through traditional channels, with supporters hailing her as a patriotic whistleblower, while critics accused her of grandstanding and potentially compromising ongoing investigations. The international implications of the scandal continued to evolve as foreign governments reassessed their relationships with the United States and adjusted their own security and diplomatic protocols to account for the possibility that American officials might be compromised. The damage to American soft power and international credibility would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. Some allies began developing contingency plans for scenarios in which they might need to operate independently of American leadership, fundamentally altering security arrangements that had been in place since World War II. As the first anniversary of Bondi's explosive interview approached, Americans found themselves living in a country that was simultaneously the same nation they had always known and a fundamentally different society grappling with questions that had never been seriously contemplated before. The investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about institutional vulnerability and the possibility of systematic corruption, but it had also demonstrated the resilience of democratic values and the capacity for self-correction that had always been among America's greatest strengths. The story that had begun with a single interview had become a national journey of discovery, accountability, and renewal that would define American democracy for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.